But now, let's explore the wardens, the prison guards of our cosmic cell, our cosmic prison, the Archons of ancient Gnosticism. I'm Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. The world of the second and especially the third centuries of the Common Era was a world increasingly coming apart, a world tearing itself apart at the seams. Especially from within the traditional perspective of ancient Egypt, it was something of an apocalypse. It was really the end of the world of ancient Egypt. Centuries of Hellenistic hegemony, Roman conquest, along with widespread economic and political stability, made for a world very much worth escaping. And a great many schools of theological, spiritual, and philosophical escapism, frankly, emerged. The inward turn of Stoicism as a coping philosophy, the mystical ascent spiritualities of Jewish Merkava and Hermetic philosophies, and the afterlife-oriented, anti-worldly redemption offered by the Christianities of that day, made for a veritable menu of technologies for just that cosmic escape. Perhaps none was more radical, none more extreme than the early species of Christianity that have come down to be known as Gnosticism. Now, to be frank, I just don't have time to do a deep dive into the incredibly complex mythologies of the Sethians and the Valentinians and the Ophites and the Basilidians or the Cainites, though I've done episodes on many of those, and they are probably worth watching, especially the episode on the Apocryphon of John and the section on the Valentinian Christianity. Those are going to be really important connective tissues to get an idea of what's going on in this video. In fact, I have a whole Gnosticism playlist you can check out if you're interested in really going deep on the Gnostic train. But the central thrust shared by many of these theologies is that the true reality is a spiritual reality, not this. It's a spiritual reality presided over by an ineffable deity whose outflowing, whose emanations generated a host of beings known as the fullness, or the pleroma in Greek. However, one such entity, Sophia, or wisdom, sought to create on her own without the consent of the great invisible spirit. This mistake created a horrifying being, a nightmarish creature known variously as Saklas, Samael, Yaldabaoth, or the demiurge. Now, unlike Platonism, Stoicism, Judaism, or other species of Christianity, for whom the creator of this world was a benevolent deity who created a maximally beautiful world, a maximally good world, these Christians held that the physical cosmos was this was all a kind of prison, ruled over by that hideous demiurge, the craftsperson, along with a retinue of malevolent beings known as the rulers, or Archons in ancient Greek. In this myth, the upper spiritual realm ultimately takes pity on us, poor human beings, and smuggles within them a divine spiritual spark, and ultimately sends Christ, Jesus, who reveals the truth about our cosmos and the means by which to escape it, and, of course, to return with him, finally, to that divine light. Of course, I'm greatly simplifying the mythology. There is an enormous amount of variation both in these schools of thought and between them, frankly. There's not just one Gnosticism. But in a structural sense, the core myth system remains remarkably consistent. There's an ineffable spiritual reality in which a metaphysical tragedy occurs, engendering the creation of the malevolent demiurge, which in turn creates the physical reality around us, the physical cosmos, in which divine elements are trapped or encased within human beings, and we as human beings have to escape this world. In this episode, however, I want to focus in on one element, just one element of this mythology, the origins and nature of the cosmic prison wardens, as it were, the Archons. Now, of course, I'll be coming back to do another episode on the origins of really the most shocking element in all of this, the origins and nature of the evil creator, or the demiurge, Sakla, Samael, Yaldabaoth. But the Archons turn out to be a crucially important element in this mythology because, in a very important sense, they have created this physical prison, including our bodies in which we are trapped and deluded into believing this is all real. They are responsible for tricking us into believing that any of this is real. And even our thoughts and emotions are just inner puppetry to control us. And that these entities must be ultimately defeated and bypassed in our final jailbreak back to the spiritual world of light, beauty, and oneness. So, what do we really know about the Archons? The term Archon would have struck ancient ears as powerfully political, though without much of the majesty or any association with royalty. I think that's important. Thus, a Latin equivalent might be magistrate or governor. They're basically political functionaries who have rule locally, but not totally. If you've ever worked in retail, they're like the assistant manager with the chip on their shoulder who get off on making your life miserable because they got picked on when they were little. They need therapy, not managerial positions. Most of what we know about the Archons can be found spread through the literature written by the so-called Gnostic Christians themselves and the polemics against them written by other Christians such as Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and Epiphanius. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, in most of these mythological systems, these are beings created or somehow generated by the malevolent demiurge, both for its own narcissistic needs, but also to act as secondary creators and enforcers of this physical prison cosmos. Thus, in an important sense, they are the beings most intimately responsible for this whole mess. And also, they are the first major hurdle that one faces in one's escape back to the realm of spiritual fullness. So, I hope you could understand that knowing a bit about them seems germane to making just that escape. Many, if not most, of the Gnostic creation myths contain some mention of the Archons, though the details on them vary greatly from text to text. Perhaps the most instructive and popular narrative is represented by the Apocryphon of John, or the secret teachings of John. Following the ignorant and mistaken creation of Yaldabaoth, a demiurge with the hideous body of a snake and the head of a lion, its eyes flashing as if bolts of lightning, that being, Yaldabaoth, mates with itself. It mates with the mindlessness within itself to produce a series of 12 fiery beings. The names of many of these beings have their origins in Jewish mythology, while others are frankly more mysterious. Very strange. I'll come back to those in just a minute toward the end of the episode. The first series of 12 Archons probably represents the creation of the zodiac and thus the fixed dome of the stars, the fixed dome of the cosmic system. This is sort of the background of everything. Now, from among these and separately are extracted, again, the text is confused here and it's probably two separate traditions that have been fused together in the Apocryphon of John. But from these, it seems that 12 independent kings are anointed or appointed over the spheres of the heavens. These 7 rulers are thus associated with the visible planets or the wandering stars of the geocentric world. These beings represent not only the spatial dimensions above us, but also the course of time itself, corresponding, as the text says, to the days of the week. We even learn a bit about their physical appearance, each having the face of various animals, such as a sheep, a donkey, a hyena, even one of flaming fire. This is a feature that probably has its origins in traditional Egyptian religious iconography. It's typically the idea of human being-like creatures having the heads of animals in religious depictions of gods. The demiurge, having created these rulers, then transferred some of his fire to them, perhaps activating them or emanating them at some level, such that they would believe he's the only God. And in his equally ignorant and narcissistic declaration, I am God. There is no God aside from me, taken from the Genesis creation story. There's immediately issued a declaration, which is basically a rebuttal by a voice from the upper supernal spiritual realm. In fact, Yaldabaoth goes so far as to model his inverse realm of darkness and matter, our world, on the supernal realm, though often with satanic inversions mirroring the upper worlds. And from these, the Archons would emerge 365 angels, though it would be better to think of them as demons for obvious reasons. Once the physical world, or our cosmic prison, was constructed, the Demiurge decided, again in an act of extreme narcissism, to create a being in his own image. However, it apparently required the aid of the Archon demons, and thus Yaldabaoth declared, let us make human beings in our image. This is, by the way, the hermeneutical answer given by the Gnostics to that statement in Genesis that's in the plural, the grammatical plural, rather than the divine singular, which is anomalous. It's not the monarchic plural, it's literally a bunch of demons making human beings. The Apocryphon of John infamously identifying the creator of the biblical Genesis story with the evil Demiurge. But Yaldabaoth, the Archons, are demons, and they all set forth to create the primordial human being, each forging a specific anatomical feature. First, the psychical features, the psychical elements of the body, and then the physical elements of the primordial human body, the Adam. Again, many of these names of the beings that construct our physical bodies and our psychical bodies are very obscure, and I'll come back to them in just a moment. Following the creation of the 365 elements of the psychical body, remember there's 365 of these Archons of some level, this would include psychical states such as desires, emotions, fear, grief, the love of pleasure, etc. Well, the Heavenly Mother at that point took pity on the primordial Adam and breathed through Yaldabaoth life into this psychical body. Of course, due to the ignorance of the Archons, which are as malevolent as they are stupid, frankly, they didn't realize that by working together that they would create a psychical Adam that would be more powerful than all of them individually. The psychical Adam was constructed by all of them, therefore had all their powers, with our powers combined. They just created a being that could best all of them. Further, enlightened insight was put down from the spiritual realm into the psychical body, giving human beings the ability to recognize at least the truth of their condition, something that the Archons certainly couldn't do. Well, maybe with one exception. But realizing their mistake, the Archons mixed together earth, air, fire, and water. They mixed together hule, matter, and cast this psychical body into a prison of matter. This is our physical bodies, and then put that physical body in a garden of delights, a garden of pleasure, the Garden of Eden, meant to intoxicate the Adam, therefore basically intoxicating him with pleasure such that he would never realize his condition, nor realize his power, and therefore never realize that he could, in fact, escape. But all of this is crucially important for considering our condition for these Christians. Not only is our physical body a prison, a point well made in dualistic theories like this, but ultimately even our psychical body is a prison. What we think of as our mental and emotional life are all created by the Archons for precisely keeping us imprisoned, shackled within delusions and emotions. Thus, not only is our physical body a prison, but also the negative thoughts and emotions which blind us to things like rage and fear and jealousy and love of pleasure. In a sense, because we are created by the Archons, our psychical and physical bodies are created by the Archons, they've left a hideous imprint of themselves in our psyches. And in this sense, we're created like people possessed as our natural condition. We're like marionettes controlled by the Archons. It's only through our enlightened insight, which came to us from the spiritual realm, and the dedication of us to our spiritual life, which Adam only recognized, by the way, in the creation of Eve, or Chava, life, that we have the ability and the means to transcend our otherwise condition of being a demonic puppet. In fact, the Apocryphon of John rejects the concept of Eve being merely a derivative of Adam. The text, in fact, notes that it was not from a rib, as Moses says, but Eve was actually made from the very image of enlightened insight that was found within Adam. Regardless, the primary role of the Archons in this element of the mythology is to explain how our physical, and I think even more importantly, our psychical bodies, having their origin in the contorted horrors of the Archons, the demons, set the primary condition for our entrapment in this prison cosmos. Now, the elaborate mythologies of these texts are at face value, they're pretty wild. I mean, Irenaeus just thought he could convince you that they're not true by just telling you what the Gnostics believe. And further, they're very much beyond the pale of virtually any such narrative about the human condition in antiquity. I mean, everyone admitted the world wasn't perfect, sure, but that this was all literally created by demons as a prison? That was a bit much, frankly, and adherents of this spirituality clearly felt the need to defend this idea, both by appealing to widely accepted Christian scriptures and by greatly clarifying the nature of these various myths. I mean, you could just add more detail to make it even stranger, and somehow that made it more believable. And that's precisely what we find in an important text found in the fourth tractate of the Second Nag Hammadi Codex, a text variously known as the Hypostasis of the Archons, or the Reality of the Rulers, or the Nature of the Archons. There's a lot of ways of translating this depending on how you want to deal with the technical term hypostasis in Greek. It's technical. In this text, the author seems to be welding together two previous documents in order to show that the Archons are, one, very much real, and two, they must be vanquished. And he does this by introducing the text with a paraphrase of the very famous quotation from Colossians 1:3, allegedly written by Paul, that the followers of Christ do not struggle against the flesh, but against the authorities, the Archons of the world, and the spirits of wickedness. In fact, other Pauline or School of Paul texts even hint that these beings live in the sky, Ephesians 3:10 and 6:12, and over at Colossians 2:8 and 2:20, it even refers to them as elemental spirits of the universe, thus linking them at some level perhaps with this vile materiality, at least in the minds of the Gnostics. Thus, the text is meant to outline the reality and nature of the Archons. In this text, the reality of the rulers, we learn that the Archons are androgyne. In fact, Yaldabaoth is also androgyne, and they have the faces of the beasts, as we noted earlier, and that they literally huffed and puffed in a failed attempt to raise the primordial Adamic body to life, all to no avail. They couldn't bring him to life. Only when the supernal breath flowed into him could he be animated. Again, you get the sense that the Archons they're pretty stupid. Numerous other versions of this archontic mythology exist in various forms of ancient Christian literature. One of the more fascinating is a partially preserved by Origen in his polemic against Celsus. Here we find details from a sect typically referred to as the Ophites, from the word snake, who apparently admired the wisdom-bequeathing snake of the Garden of Eden, who the Archons sought to destroy. In their mythology, the snake really revealed to us all the wisdom, and the Archons tried to get rid of him. And what has come down to us as the Ophite diagram, we have what seems to have been a kind of esoteric, geometric, representation or diagram of reality, from the supernal realms all the way down to the infernal realms, with a series of 7 Archons, which may have been generations of Yaldabaoth, sort of Yaldabaoth emanating itself, though again the text isn't clear. In fact, there are 2 different layers of the text, and it's preserved by Origen. But interestingly enough here, the Archons actually include classic archangels, again with beastly heads, though one of them is clearly a corrupt version of the Hebrew tohu vavohu, the primordial chaos out of which creation is drawn there in the first creation story. Interestingly also, the entire system is actually bounded at 2 levels by Leviathan and Behemoth as something like world souls for the psychical and material realms, respectively. So here Leviathan and Behemoth play a role, though exactly what that role is isn't clear. Truth be told, the exact nature of the Ophite diagram is debated. There are lots of different representations, and this is probably just a good idea to say this will be a future episode. Another very important text is the incredibly learned, brilliant text on the origin of the world found just after Reality of the Rulers in the Nag Hammadi library, and it also contains a list of Archons, which the text refers to as the 7 powers of the heavens of chaos. Band name alert. At any rate, 3 of these, Yal and Eloi and Astaphios, are actually denoted as directly sons of Yaldabaoth. Also, good band name. This wonderful text, one of my favorites actually from the Nag Hammadi library, details how the other Archons actually went to war against the righteous Archon, Sabaoth, and in triumph he would go on to create the Seraphim, the angels that rotate around the throne saying, "Holy, holy, holy," to celebrate Sabaoth, and eventually he's responsible for creating Jesus. Sabaoth in this myth creates Jesus Christ himself. Thus, at least in this myth cycle, the rebel Archon Sabaoth, who creates Jesus, he's empowered from above and would eventually be sent into our realm to teach the path of redemption. Thus, in a very important sense, it's actually an Archon, a redeemed Archon, but an Archon that ultimately provides the path to salvation via the teachings of Christ. In fact, salvation, it isn't clear that Sabaoth himself even has access to. He might not be able to escape this realm, somehow making him all the more noble. Sabaoth really is the MVP of this system. Now, any reader of these texts, especially Pistis Sophia and the Apocryphon of John, will face a significant degree of bewilderment at some of the names of the Archons or their attending angels, demons. So the natural question is just the origins of both the system of Archons and why do they have these bizarre names? Why are they named this? The origin question, while not ever going to be definitively answered, is probably, likely, maybe, that it was common in the ancient world to attach angels, demons, and daimons to the various celestial regions in antiquity and the various celestial objects in antiquity. In fact, this would continue well into the Middle Ages, with angels basically moving planets around as their efficient causation, and even with magical texts like the Arbitel with its various system of invocation of planetary spirits. Thus, the 12-fold division followed by a 7-fold division, followed then by a 365-fold division, which is found again in the Apocryphon of John. Well, it just nicely captures the circular dome of the zodiac as the outermost sphere of the geocentric cosmos, in which the moon and the sun and the 5 classical wandering stars, the planets, move about, followed by 365 days of the solar year. Thus, insofar as the Archons are at the origin and control the fate of the material and psychical cosmos, including our physical and psychical bodies, they would go from the fixed stars at the very limit, to the very outer edge, to the wandering stars, down to the days of the year. This all gives them power over both the physical cosmos of space, but also the processual cosmos of time. It's basically the demonization of the attending beings at work in the cosmos of antiquity. If you take those and just make them all evil, well, they go from being angels and daimons to being Archons. Now, the more difficult issue is the often bewildering names given to these beings. Now, many of them are clearly derived from Hebrew Aramaic divine names, which are then transposed and corrupted into Greek and Coptic. These are sometimes traditional angelic names, which simply undergo demonization. A great many of the others, frankly, are perplexing in origin. And this is especially true for names like Yaldabaoth, although there's some guessing that this is maybe Aramaic or Hebrew for the child of chaos or the begetter of chaos. The maternal spirit Barbello, which again has a kind of Aramaic feel to it, and the host of Archons and angel demons found especially in the names of the beings responsible for the construction of the primordial Adamical body in the Apocryphon of John, or the profusion of entities that populate the treasuries of the books of You and the Pistis Sophia, among a great many other Gnostic texts. But the situation here isn't totally hopeless. We're not totally hopeless in terms of finding out where these names may have come from. Interestingly enough, some of these obscure names are actually found not just in Gnostic literature, but they're also found in the great arcane collection known to us as the Greek magical papyri. In a really fascinating article, the classicist Howard Jackson locates numerous instances in which many of these archontic names are also found in a wide range of magical uses, such as incantations, nomina barbara, which is very important here, and sigil-like uses in the Greek magical papyri. I agree, I think, with his assessment that either the two bodies of literature, Gnostic and magical, share a common ancestor, that is to say, perhaps they go back to something like the indigenous Egyptian ritual technology, and there's clearly definitely Egyptian words in some of this. And I think one that's slightly more likely is that the Gnostic texts are actually lifting many of these archontic names from the magical literature in the Egyptian context in which these texts, the Gnostic texts, are being composed. Thus, we might very well have a kind of magic to Gnosticism pipeline in the ancient world, and that even might give us a glimpse into the milieu of the authors that generated these Gnostic texts. In fact, this is all the more reinforced given the definite similarities between the rare instances of Gnostic ritual life, especially something like the complex baptism rituals to be found in texts like the Books of You, which I've made a whole episode about those, and the wider range of Greco-Egyptian magic. There's just no way that those baptism rituals, which are found in books like the Gnostic Book of You, and the magical technologies found in the Greek magical papyri, are just not related. Simply not happening.